Hello. Today we are having a very important discussion. It is about understanding your boss better. It goes without saying that ability to do this will nicely pay you back in improved relations with your boss, which may lead to more rewarding and interesting job assignments, higher salary and bonuses, and quicker career progression.
Yes, this is what we will be talking about today. More specifically, what makes your boss behave the way she or he does, and what conduct and patterns of actions you can expect from your boss. Insights into your boss's predisposition and behavior will allow you to build the best strategy to deal with your manager.
You've just said patterns of actions. Do you mean that behavior of any leader does not depend uniquely on this particular person's temperament, personality, or mood? Do you mean that a leader is a category which has certain unique behavioral inclination?
Yes, who is a leader, a manager, a boss, a chief? These are all organizational titles to name a person who has power in an organization. And as people of power, they are very similar in many aspects. What drives their behavior often depends not only on the character, personality, or mood they have, but on their position in an organization in terms of power possession.
Do you mean that people with power have certain distinguishing features which power creates? Some of them are positive and some of them are negative?
Yes, in fact, due to the presence of the negative consequences of having power, it is rather hard to be a good leader. In reality, power often affects the people who have it in ways that make being a good leader much harder and being a bad leader much simpler. There are many examples of this. Take any business company which has a great potential but performs on a mediocre level. One of the major reasons is the top management making decisions under the influence of negative effects of power. At the same time, it is important to state in the very beginning that power can be used for good or for bad. It is not inherently a bad thing. In fact, it is necessary to have power in order to be able to accomplish goals. It is actually an essential tool for leaders.
What I hear you saying is that power is a force which can be used for good or bad. Can I say, for example, that since I am a good person, power does not negatively affect me?
Good question. However, you are wrong. There are very certain psychological and physical mechanisms how power influences any human being. Power affects individuals on the level of their physical body and on the level of their psychology. This means that any person gets under the influence of power when she or he gets power. In other words, there are similarities in all people who have power. Of course, each individual is different, and each person's influence by power may vary. But the underlying channels of the force of power on a human system is the same for everyone. The precise changes that power creates in its holders depend on the person and the situation, but there are patterns.
Since these channels operate on underlying physical, psychological levels, most of the time, a person with power simply is not aware of the influence. Usually, it starts to be noticed by people around. Okay, I get it. Sounds persuasive. However, I think that ordinary people do not need to worry about it. All this is about people who have power, CEOs of global companies, influential politicians, and so on, right?
And again, a good question, but you are wrong. The force of power uses the same mechanism to influence people whether they have lots of power or a little bit of it. Of course, the level of influence is different, but the mechanism is the same. So a person with little power may develop a strong consequences of power possession similar to a person with lots of power. Or it may be less.
Let's look at this question this way. What is power? Power can be viewed in two ways, as having control of one's life and as having control over others. As a group of researchers put it, power involves control over resources and over end results for oneself and others. This means that we often have some power without realizing it. This means that often we are under the effect of the force of power without realizing it. Let's go to basics. For example, a teacher has appointed a child in a kindergarten to be responsible for distributing some craft supplies to other kids. Yes, you are right. This child now has some power. But of course, when you are a manager or a top manager, it goes without words that you have power. When you are any type of a leader, you have power.
Well, this is all interesting. So, what about my boss?
Yes, your boss. By having the position of the boss, this individual has some power. As I've said previously, power affects people both positively and negatively. And then these effects influence the actions and conduct of a boss. What type of effect would you like to start with?
Of course, the positive. Good. There are many benefits which power creates for its holders.
Having power is a unique experience. According to extensive research, power has a strong effect on those who possess it. When activated, the experience of power can change a person's physiology, cognition, and behavior in significant ways. Power fundamentally changes how an individual construes and approaches the world. Those with power live in a very different psychological space than those without power. The first positive effect of power is that a sense of control and choice is present to a significant degree. And since the need for control of your own life is one of the fundamental needs of a human being, the presence of a sense of control of your own life is a robust predictor of physical and mental well-being and even the length of life. Since the person controls his life, environment, there is less stress connected to unexpected events that a person has little influence over. Such a person feels that they have a command over situations and events. This leads to decrease of stress hormone, cortisol, which is harmful when released often. Decrease in the level of cortisol leads to increased ability to pay attention, to prioritize. Not only cortisol drops, but the level of testosterone, which is the hormone of dominance, increases. Higher level of testosterone leads to increased ability to handle situations, to think logically.
Yes, this definitely is important. This is why probably when a person gets promoted, she often starts looking healthier and seems smarter.
Sure, and there are many other positive consequences of having power. For example, another positive effect that power creates for those who have it is orientation toward active actions and increased motivation, desire, drive, and ability to pursue goals.
Elevated power activates the behavioral approach system of a human body, which regulates behavior associated with rewards. Lower power activates the behavioral inhibition system, which regulates behavior in response to threats and punishment. Therefore, individuals who have power experience more of positive emotions, are less reserved and shy, and view their environment as less threatening and more rewarding than those who lack power. The goal-driven nature of power's effects means that powerful individuals are prone to greater action orientation. Those with power are less afraid of difficulties and perceive their environment as less threatening and more rewarding than those without power. In fact, many studies have shown that powerful individuals are more likely to perceive rewards in a situation and are less likely to be afraid of threats and difficulties, leading to more initiative, creativity, and purposeful actions.
Now I understand why my boss, after he was promoted from a lower position, became more optimistic and energetic. Are there any more of positive consequences of having power?
Yes, there are many more. But because we don't have much time for our discussion today, let's turn to a few negatives that power creates for those who have it. Actually, the individual with power does not feel its negative effects. These negatives are felt by people around, by subordinates, for example. The negative effect is felt by people around first.
Okay.
One of the distinguishing features of a person with power is reduced ability to identify with others, reduced ability for empathy. I'm sure you know how important empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person is. So, as I've said, people with power have this ability at a low level. When a person gets more power, they gradually become colder and indifferent to others.
There is physiological explanation of this. The ability to share the emotions of others is strongly linked to the function of so-called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons get activated when we see someone in distress, so that in a sense, we also feel the pain that another person is experiencing. However, power significantly reduces the work of mirror neurons. For example, an experiment was conducted when individuals primed with high and low power watched a several seconds video where a ball was hardly squeezed. Ordinary people's physiological response system was activated significantly more than those who felt more power. As a result, compassion is not what describes many people with power.
You are so right. There were several instances when my boss was not moved at all when subordinates told him about big hardships they were having. I was really surprised. I thought that those stories would move even a rock.
At the same time, I'd like to make a note here. Not all people with power are this way. There is a highly important factor which makes sure individuals with power actually feel strong compassion and have strong empathy. Just keep in mind this fact. Are there any other negatives of power?
Unfortunately, yes. One more negative consequence of having power is that such individuals do not take advice from others. The ability of powerful individuals to take advice and use it in their decision-making is especially important for their organizations. However, a negative consequence of power is that powerful individuals are more vulnerable to decision mistakes because they ignore information from others. Significant research has shown that increased power is associated with less advice taking, even if advice is readily available and can significantly improve performance. Greater power reduces advice taking due to the elevated confidence in the accuracy of one's own judgments. The feeling of power leads to an individual